Imagine if there's a school where having fun is against the rules, and even laughing is strictly banned. Jerem Horwitz Elementary School has those standards. During recess time, like other students, George and Harold are trying to have some fun. They love following their passion for creating comics. Their favorite one is Captain Underpants. It's about a superhero who was born on a planet where everyone only wore underpants. One day, it was struck by a disaster, and Captain Underpants was sent to Earth. He was brought up by dolphins. Yep, dolphins. That's how George wrote the story, and he made Captain Underpants the biggest superhero of all time. By following the story, Harold illustrates the comic, and it's finally completed. The two kids start imagining the success they may achieve by publishing their masterpiece, but then their dreams are shattered by their cruel principal, Mr. Krupp. He tears the comic into pieces and calls George and Harold to his office. He locks the door with an automatic system and blames the kids for a recent mishap. The school notice was changed with an inappropriate message, and Mr. Krupp believes George and Harold did that. Despite the strict rules, these two kids keep doing new pranks every day to bring some smiles to kids' faces. Otherwise, this school is no fun. Mr. Krupp doesn't understand the students' needs and keeps looking for proof to punish George and Harold, but he hasn't got any yet. So the kids are free for now, but they aren't going to stop their mischievous behavior. They do it for the sake of other students who seem like they are being captured in jail. They memorize daily lessons and have no other activities like sports, arts, or music. All the students and teachers are fed up with the system except Melvin. He's only concerned about grades and often complains about other students to get extra credits from Mr. Krupp. As the bell rings, the teacher enters the classroom with the hope of enjoying the weekend. But then, Mr. Krupp announces a science exhibition. That's how he ruins every weekend by arranging unnecessary events. There are enough valid reasons for hating this school, and kids only smile when they get out of here. George and Harold are neighbors, and they spend the rest of their day in their treehouse. George keeps writing new creative stories, and Harold draws them as comics. As the night sets in, they both go to bed and wake up happily as it's Saturday. They were planning to spend the day in pajamas, but then their parents reminded them of the science exhibition. Mr. Krupp has fired the science teacher because he requested to let him spend the weekend with his family. Now the students have to listen to Melvin explaining his inventions. Everyone is dying of boredom, and only George and Harold can save this situation. They notice Mr. Krupp napping, and they sneak into the stage to mess with Melvin's invention. The machine starts throwing toilet paper everywhere, and the students enjoy the funny situation. Mr. Krupp gets up and scolds Melvin for his poor invention. George and Harold thought they would never get caught, but the next day, they were called into the office. One of Melvin's inventions was a turtle fitted with a camera, and it recorded everything. Mr. Krupp finally has some proof to take action against George and Harold. He does the worst and puts the two best friends in separate classes. The kids get really worried and believe their friendship will be destroyed like this. They have been together since kindergarten and get along perfectly with each other. Their lives will lose color if they stay apart. The kids decide to take some action. The only solution they can think of is stealing the turtle. The next morning, they keep an eye on Mr. Krupp. When he gets out of the office to follow his crush, Edith, the kids sneak into his room. They couldn't find the turtle, but they found their belongings, which were taken away by the principal. Suddenly, Mr. Krupp comes back. He has tied up the turtle to his leg, and there's no way kids can steal it. He takes out the class transfer papers and is about to sign them. George has found his toy ring in the principal's office and threatens Mr. Krupp of using the ring to hypnotize him. The principal laughs at his childish behavior, but then something strange happens. Everything starts to float, and Mr. Krupp goes into a deep sleep. George orders Mr. Krupp to become a chicken, and he starts behaving like one. The ring actually works. Both kids play with Mr. Krupp for a while, but then they get a great idea. They order Mr. Krupp to become Captain Underpants. In just a blink of an eye, the principal takes off his clothes, grabs the curtains, and starts assuming himself as Captain Underpants. The fun turns into a nightmare when Mr. Krupp jumps out of the window to save the city while George and Harold run after him. In his imagination, he's helping everyone, but in fact, he's just causing more trouble. The kids fail to catch him, and Mr. Krupp climbs up a high building. He assumes the giant balloon is a monster and attacks him. Fortunately, George and Harold use a crane to save their principal. They also dodge the policeman by telling him that Mr. Krupp is their old uncle who suffers from sleepwalking, and that's how they sneak back to their treehouse. After the tiring day, the kids try to figure out how to cure Mr. Krupp. While discussing that, they accidentally spill water over Mr. Krupp, and he turns back to normal, and watering him again can turn him into Captain Underpants. The kids keep throwing water at the old man and drain his energy. Mr. Krupp falls unconscious, and the kids drag him to his house. Surprisingly, the house is quite normal, but it represents how sad and lonely the owner is. Maybe that's why Mr. Krupp has such a bad temper. The kids feel sorry for him and don't want to end up lonely like him. For that, they must keep playing with Mr. Krupp so he can't change their classes. The next morning, George and Harold enter the school with loud music and disco lights. Mr. Krupp gets furious and signs the class transfer papers immediately. The kids don't show much reaction and throw water at him. Captain Underpants is back. The kids drag him to the storeroom and tell him that he's on a secret mission for which he needs to disguise himself as the principal. Captain Underpants understands the assignment and tries to behave like a rude principal. When he reaches the office, a weird guy is waiting for him. He calls himself Professor P and wants to apply for the position of science teacher, but he doesn't have any teaching experience, and his portfolio is full of dangerous, inhuman experiments. Captain Underpants gets fascinated by the mad scientist and hires him immediately. Professor P is here for a special mission. He hates laughter and wants to remove the human ability to laugh. He has been researching this for years and believes that school is the best place to perform his deadly experiments. After knowing his evil motives, George and Harold rush to the principal's office and openly discuss how to get rid of the new professor. Mr. Krepp turned to normal while they were out, but with just a click of fingers, he's Captain Underpants again. The kids use him to get Professor P's file to know his last name. He must be hiding it for a purpose, and that's right. Professor's last name is Poopypants. It's sure a funny one, and George and Harold know how to make it even funnier. They make another Captain Underpants with Professor Poopypants as the main villain. The whole school is laughing at the science professor. This reminds him of the time when he was about to receive an award for his marvelous inventions. But as soon as his name was announced, everyone started laughing. That was the time when he decided to wipe away laughter from the world. Professor Poopypants complains to the principal, but he's still under hypnosis and advises the professor to enjoy the comic. Unfortunately, it gives Poopypants a marvelous idea. He decides to research Melvin, who doesn't have a sense of humor at all. Scanning reveals that this boring kid's brain doesn't even have the part which is responsible for laughter. While Poopypants is busy there, George, Harold, and Captain Underpants are trying to make school more fun. They perform an orchestra show with silly sounds and even reopen the art room. Captain Underpants wants to do more and orders a whole carnival on the school grounds. Everything seems unbelievably perfect. But there's one huge problem. It's getting more and more difficult to keep Mr. Krepp away from water. George and Harold take turns to keep an eye on Mr. Krepp, but they also want to enjoy the carnival. Regardless of their efforts, Mr. Krepp ends up getting wet when the rain starts to pour. He gets really angry to see his school half destroyed and takes out all his frustrations on George and Harold. He put them in separate classes, but the poor kids feel like they are sitting in two different worlds. The worlds which have been absorbed in different galaxies, and the two best friends will never be able to unite. Meanwhile, Poopypants completes his research on Melvin. He will use him to wipe out the laughter from the rest of the world. He uses his enlarging gun to turn Melvin's robotic toilet into a huge monster, but they need a large amount of power to run it, something like a nuclear power plant. Melvin knows an even more toxic source, the school cafeteria leftovers. Poopypants uses it to drive his robot and brings terror to the whole city. George and Harold get out of their boring class and meet in the restroom. There's no time for an emotional reunion. The city is under attack. Poopypants drives his robot to the school and uses an instrument attached to Melvin to steal the students' laughter. George and Harold keep hiding away to save their sense of humor. They don't want to live boring lives without jokes and pranks. Their only hope is Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, he's totally useless without superpowers. Poopypants grabs the poor captain, presses him like a sandwich, and beats him brutally. While he's distracted, George and Harold try to convince Melvin to leave the mad professor's side. Unfortunately, he doesn't agree. Then the kids apologize to Poopypants for making fun of his name and advise him to take it lightly and learn to laugh at himself. Poopypants doesn't want to give up his weird revenge and throws Captain Underpants in the giant toilet. Afterward, he grabs the kids to remove their laughing ability. Surprisingly, the laughter part in their heads is bigger than their brains. Poopypants puts the laser at the highest power and the kids' laughter part starts to shrink. It almost disappears, but then Poopypants mentions the planets that he's going to conquer. This reminds the kids of the Uranus joke they made in kindergarten. It makes George and Harold laugh out loud. Their laughter is so powerful that it destroys Poopypants' laser device. All the students get back their laughing ability. However, Poopypants hasn't given up yet. He attacks again with his shrinking gun. George and Harold run here and there and pray for a miracle. Suddenly, Captain Underpants jumps out of the toilet. The toxic fluid has given him superpowers. He beats up Poopypants and snatches his gun. But he's dumb like always and turns the mad scientist into a huge monster and the school into a tiny building. There are tiny students inside and also tiny teachers with their tiny salaries, which represent society's efforts for education. George and Harold play their part and use the gun to shrink Poopypants. The villain flies away on a bee and the whole city is saved by the legendary hero, Captain Underpants. But he can't stay for long. The kids must bring back Mr. Krepp. George takes off the ring and smashes it with his shoe. The hypnosis is removed, and Mr. Krepp rushes to his house. George and Harold make a friendship promise that they will be each other's best friend forever, regardless of being in separate classes. But they still want to fix Mr. Krepp's life. He needs someone to cheer him up. For that purpose, George and Harold write fake love letters to both Mr. Krepp and Edith. The touch of love makes the grumpy principal smile ear to ear. He has learned the worth of happiness and may not behave rudely again. George and Harold are seeing their principal enjoying his date and feel proud of what they did. They are unaware of the surprise coming their way. The robotic toilet has turned other toilets into creepy monsters. But the bigger surprise is Mr. Krepp can still turn into Captain Underpants with just a click of the fingers. With his dumb but passionate presence, no villain can harm the public. The rude people aren't always the bad guys. They just need a little love to bring back their smiles.